All right, so like I said, I'm going to be recording this for my online section as well. So if somebody asks a question, I may repeat that question into the microphone because it's much easier than me running the mic up to you guys and saying, hey, can you repeat that? So instead, I will probably just repeat the question. Not that I would imagine that many of you guys are going to have a ton of questions about the content that we're going to talk about today. Most of it's going to be pretty familiar to you. I would imagine most of you have sent emails or seen a memo, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about applying communication skills. We're going to talk about planning good news, bad news, because guess what? Each of you at some point in your career will send each one of these kinds of messages. You will get to say to somebody, hey, congratulations, you are getting a promotion. You will also get to say to somebody at some point, hey, guess what? The company's going through what we call right sizing, meaning guess what? You no longer have a job. I'm sorry. That's bad news. I would imagine most of you would think that that was bad news. You will also have to persuade people from time to time to do something that you want them to do, right? One of the best examples I can think of that is that I was told when I interviewed for a director's position with the revenue cycle team that I would occasionally have to persuade my coworkers that something that was inherently bad for them would actually be good for them. So that's the kind of fun stuff you will get to do. We'll also talk about the formatting. Like I said, I'm not so worried about are you using Times New Roman, that kind of stuff. What I am concerned about is do you have the correct format of the letter? Do you have the person's name that you are addressing? Do you have their address? Do you have your name? Are you signing off with something respectful and professional? Those are the kinds of things that we're looking for when I talk about formatting, not do you have double space size 12 font? Let's figure that out later, okay? We'll also talk about writing instructions, asking for directions or giving directions, and also requesting items. Many of you will be requesting things. Some of you will try to request things from me at some point in the near future, maybe in later semesters. I get lots of students from this class that move on and request references from me. Hey, can you provide a reference for this scholarship or for this internship position? We will have to learn how to do those appropriately. Okay, and then also how to say no. Some of you may get a response from me that says, no, sorry, I only provide reference requests for my GAs or for beta alpha psi students. That is kind of my hard and fast rule for that. Otherwise, I would be writing reference requests nonstop. So, we also want to keep goodwill. I don't want to make you not my buddies anymore. I just want to let you know, hey, this is my procedure, this is my process, and I'm not going to vary from that, okay? So what you need to do first is you need to determine what is your reader's reaction going to be, okay? They're typically going to react one of four ways. They're either going to be pleased with the message, they're going to be displeased with the message, they may have a neutral feeling towards the message, or they may have little or no interest. We have all felt this way about messages that we've gotten, whether that's an email or a text message. I know that when my wife texts me and says we're having teriyaki chicken for dinner tonight, I am displeased because it is not my favorite meal. So, you have all felt a certain way about a message, okay? When we are approaching these messages, we need to consider how we think the audience is going to react, and then we need to use an approach like the direct method, or the direct approach, or maybe an indirect approach, okay? Or maybe we need to be persuading them. So for these pleased or neutral reactions, you really just want to use a direct approach because there's no point in beating around the bush. Just say what you got to say, get to the point immediately, typically in your opening sentence. If you're going to have a displeased reaction, this typically comes from bad news messages, right? This is from, hey, guess what? We're downsizing, you're fired. Sorry about you. You're not really going to say that. That's a horrible way to do it. You're going to do it much more professionally than that. But you are still delivering bad news to somebody, right? So you want to use kind of a direct or an indirect approach for that. You want to kind of soften the blow a little bit, okay? You know, I've got a student in one of my 201 classes that wears Eagles gear every day to class, which hurts me, makes me upset. I have been softening the blow all week with him that they are going to lose this weekend. So I am delivering bad news to him, but I'm softening that blow. I act like I care about how his broken arm's doing. Hey, bud, how's your arm? Guess what? Eagles are going to lose, right? So not really. Very nice kid. Tell him I respect the decision to wear your Eagles gear to class. Even though it means you're going to fail this class. So, if you have little to no interest, you really just want to use that persuasive approach, right? So, if my wife sent me a text message saying, hey, we're having teriyaki chicken for dinner tonight, but we're having brownies for dessert. Guess what fat guy loves brownies? This one right here. I'm now excited about dinner, okay? She has persuaded me to be excited about dinner. Makes sense? I know, not super professional, but you put it in terms that people can understand, and it seems to make a little more sense to them, okay? So this is just kind of a little diagram to show you guys, here's when you should be using these. This is straight out of your book, so if you're using your book at all, you'll have access to this diagram. Just be familiar with it. Use this to determine, based on how you think the audience is going to react, use this to determine what kind of approach you are going to use when you are writing your message, okay? This one right here, I think, is probably one of the more important ones that we're going to talk about here. This one you may not be completely familiar with, but I would say you are familiar with it. We all communicate every day. There's a reason you guys have gotten as far as you have in your education. It's because you can communicate, right? So, we call these the 6 C's of communication. And if you follow these, you should be fine when you are doing written communication. Make sure that you are being clear. You want to use specific information. You want to use direct wording, right? Transitions from one topic to the next, okay? Just be clear in what you're trying to say. You want to make sure that you're being complete. This is very important, especially when you're giving directions, okay? You can't give incomplete directions. That's no bueno, right? That's no good. So you have to be complete. You have to give the audience, whoever it is you're writing to, you have to give them all the information that they need to complete the objective that you're trying to set for them, okay? But you also want to be concise, which is something I am horrible at. Obviously, they pay me to talk, and I talk way too much, okay? You need to be concise. Get to the point as quickly as you possibly can. Like we said, sometimes you got to belay the point a little bit, and you have to maybe buffer it with a little bit of softness to get to that bad news, to get to that point. You want to be consistent, so use consistent language, use consistent formatting. If you are going to, we'll talk about, and we did talk about in the other chapters about how do you format numbers and all that. You need to make sure that you are using the correct format consistently. When you are citing later on in this class, we will be doing lots of citations. You need to make sure that your citations are consistent. Jenna and Sydney will walk you through those citations to make sure that you're getting them right, okay? You also want to make sure that the information you're giving is correct. This is extremely important for you guys as accountants because guess what can happen? And I'm talking about slippery slope argument right here, but it can happen. Guess what can happen if you give people bad information and they follow your advice? They can go to jail. You can go to jail. It's a fun thing about the accounting profession. You can go to jail if you're not very good at your job, okay? So it's important that you're giving better, correct information. Make sure the information that you are providing is correct. Now that obviously is a slippery slope argument. Hopefully, fingers crossed, none of you end up in jail for your accounting practices. But what can happen is you work for a CPA firm and you have a business paying you guys tens of thousands of dollars a year to provide them with tax information and to provide them with tax advice, and you give them bad advice, and now all of a sudden the IRS is knocking on their door telling them they're violating portions of the IRC, and they don't have a leg to stand on because there is no precedent, there is no argument to be made for that, and it's because you gave them bad advice. So make sure the advice you're giving them is correct, okay? And then finally, be courteous. We talked about this day one in the class, right? We're going to joke around in this class. We're going to have a good time in this class, but we need to be courteous. It's the same thing with your writing. You cannot be discourteous in your writing. Now, I joked about the email I got from the student last night, and that was legit an email I got from a student last night. Was he trying to be rude? Probably not. He's just never had anybody tell him, bro, you don't send emails like that to your professors, okay? Nobody has stopped him from doing that. To me, it seems discourteous because I teach a class on professionalism. I harp on you guys constantly. Even though I know that Mackenzie is in my 300-001 section, if she sends, or not Mackenzie, Abby, sends me an email without that information in it, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to send it back to her and say, what course and section is this for? I teach 6 classes across several hundred students. Sorry. Now, you guys, I actually try really hard to remember your names. So, obviously, still working on it. That's just a courtesy thing. Give me all the information I need, right? That's being that clear. That's being clear. That's being complete, right? You're giving me all, holy crap, that is weird. I don't like that. That is clear, that is concise, that is complete. You're telling me everything I need to know, okay? That thing is funky, man. I like it because I can move around, which I do a lot. I don't like it because it does weird crap like that, so. All right, anyways, this thing is not working today, so I'm gonna put it down. Special formatting and mechanical techniques. This is pretty important when it comes to the memos, when it comes to the letters. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to be able to put a pretty clear definition visually when you're changing topics. Some of these letters you're going to write towards the end of the semester. You will write a letter for a client based on some Edgar analysis that you do, including data visualization. I will expect you to be able to delineate topics for me. Be able to tell me when you've moved on to a new topic visually. Okay, that means using some of these formatting techniques. Okay, so you want to enumerate lists of important items. Does anybody know what that means? Yeah, you can number it. You can use bullet points, that kind of thing. Just basically call it out using bullet points, using numbers, that kind of thing. Okay. If you want to emphasize a point when the sequence isn't important, then use bullet points. Otherwise, you want to enumerate, especially if you're making a request and asking somebody to follow your directions. I have found that even with you guys, I need to be very clear when I give you directions. I need to say, step 1, do this thing. Step 2, after you have completed step 1, now you can do this thing. Okay? So you have to be able to do that. Now, when it's not so important that they follow it in a specific order, then you can use bullet points. Okay? Use other types of text formatting, bold, capitalization, underline, italices, that kind of thing, to emphasize important details. Now, that does not mean that you want to send an email completely 100% in caps bold. That seems like a not great idea. I have seen people do this. It is horrible. It is usually people that are in their 70s and probably don't need to be sending emails because that just typically is what I've seen. Is it's typically people that are just not familiar with the technology do things like that. You have to use them selectively. Make sure that it's emphasizing a point. Because if your entire email is caps, are you emphasizing anything except for the fact that you didn't realize your caps lock key was on? No. Okay. Columns, headings, tables, that kind of thing. That makes kind of what we do in this profession a little bit easier when we're providing analytics, when we're providing statistics for people, when we're providing numbers. It is much easier for people who are non-accountants to look at a table of those numbers, to put those in columns. Remember, when we are writing, and I will tell you guys this again as we progress through the class, when we are writing, not everybody is an accountant. Not everybody gets super pumped to see a block full of numbers, okay? We do, because that's what we signed up for. The farmer that you're working for may not be that excited about it. So you got to take those things into consideration, find ways to format it so that it makes sense to them, okay? All of these things, it's kind of the same thing. You're using these to emphasize points, to draw attention to things. You just have to be careful, like I said, with the caps lock, to not overuse it because then it kind of dilutes the entire purpose of it, okay? So the organization for written communication, you really want to state your purpose. Obviously, that's the first thing you want to do. Okay, you want to make it clear what your purpose is. And sometimes you can do that if, let's say, you just had a meeting with that person a week ago based on this email or this letter or this memo that you're sending. You can reference that meeting, reference past events, past conversations that you've had, past communication that you've had, and that helps make the purpose more clear. Okay, you should be going to your main points pretty quickly. Okay, even in those bad news messages, you still want to get to your point pretty quickly. Like, I don't want to read a 3-page email of you being nice to me, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention you're not going to have a job come Monday. Okay, you do want to get to the point quickly, but even with those bad news messages, you may have to buffer it on occasion, okay? Statement of future action. You guys heard me say this a lot during the elevator pitches, right? Make sure, this is what I kept calling kind of your call to action, right? Tell them what you need or want them to do, okay? Make sure there are no questions. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is just simply, I need you to do this thing. Make sure it gets done. Typically, you can do this very effectively by providing a due date or a deadline for them. I just had to do it again today. I had to remind the entire faculty in the School of Accountancy to please send me their academic integrity policies because I'm working on a committee that is reviewing those. I asked for those weeks ago. Today was the deadline, had to remind them. Okay, so advantages of written documents. Really, from an auditor's perspective, I always like written documents because it's documented. Okay, you can go back and look at it. Having written documentation has saved my butt when I'm working on work papers several times because it's like, oh, there's actual documentation of this. I learned a very valuable lesson at one point. I was having to make cold calls to vendors. A town had not been paying their bills. They had a lot of vendors where they had accounts in arrears, and I was having to cold call vendors and get information. Well, I didn't do a very good job of recording who I talked to and what we talked about and what they said they would send me. And my manager and director on the audit asked me for some information. I could not provide it to them, and it was very important that we had this information. That was a lesson for me to start recording those items. Okay, I had a spreadsheet that was very detailed about my spoken communication that I kind of turned into a little bit of written communication. Okay. People do typically attach more importance to written communication. If you get a letter in the mail, if you get, like CPA firms are going to send out engagement letters to auditees. We don't just make a phone call and say, hey, guess what? You're being audited. Our audit does not cover this, this, or this. This is the scope of our audit. You actually send a physical letter to them that has to be signed. They have to recognize that they were sent that letter. Okay, so written communication, they attach that importance to that letter. I know at the state auditor's office, we also included those letters at the front of the report, and I think it's the same with public auditing. You include that engagement letter at the front of the report. People typically read letters in private or at least in quieter areas. They take the time to look through their mail, look through letters, things like that. So they're going to be able to focus on it a little bit more. I know that a lot of people have like their email on their phone. And so it may be a little bit harder to concentrate on your email if it's on your phone and you're sitting on your couch watching a movie than it is if you were actually in your office and open an engagement letter or open a letter from your tax expert providing you advice on something. Okay. You may enclose certain items if you have receipts, if you have invoices, purchase orders, that kind of thing. You may include those with a letter or with a memo or some kind of written communication. Typically, if you see these on emails, they're going to be included as like an attachment, right? So. You want to make sure that you're using the right form of communication. That's what this whole chapter is about, right? How do I know which form of communication to use? Typically, if you just need it to be quick and you're not really too concerned about the audience, you're going to send an email, right? So you're going to send emails. Those are external, internal. Doesn't matter. I get lots of both. If you need to send what I would call like an expert's opinion to an external party, you're going to send a letter. You don't typically include those internally. Memos are what you would send internally. Memos typically are announcements for things like retirements, for new hires. So if you get a new hire in the department, they're going to send out a memo saying, hey, let's welcome our new hire this week. We're super excited to have them, yada, yada, yada. You'll also see a lot of memos when you get out into the real world, into the professional world. You'll see a lot of memos about operating procedures, about HR rules. Fun fact, when you see an HR memo come out, it's typically because somebody's violated that policy. So if you see HR memos, it's because somebody done messed up and they're in trouble. And they're reminding the rest of the company, hey, this is a policy, don't forget, okay? Another important thing, and this will be important for those of you, well, audit, tax, doesn't matter. If you go into healthcare, it doesn't matter. You cannot send confidential information through emails. We had a very strict process when I worked at Mercy. We called it breaking the glass, right? So even if I needed to look at somebody's account for whatever reason, let's say I was performing some kind of analysis and I was spot checking, I was testing my samples, and I went in to verify something or validate a piece of data. I would break the glass as soon as I opened that account. And if that account had specific items in it, like behavioral health, I would get an email from the higher up saying, what are you doing in that account? You work in finance. You have no reason to be in this person's account. What are you doing? Okay. It was the same thing with emails. I saw a lot of people get in trouble on accident through no fault of their own. And typically you didn't get fired, but you did get reprimanded because they would send confidential information, what we call PHI in the health industry, right? Personal health care information. They would send it out in an email, and you accidentally hit the wrong recipient. And now you've sent somebody's birth date and social security number to somebody outside of the organization. Does that seem like a good thing to do? No. So you have to be incredibly, incredibly careful. Okay? So as far as formats for emails and memos, they're pretty similar, right? You're going to have a subject line, okay? The subject line, and we talked about this kind of day one in the class, you need to be pretty specific about what you're asking, right? So the email I got from the student last night was literally a blank subject line. I have no freaking clue what they were asking me about, okay? No idea. I knew it was a 201 student because my expectation is that 300 students are not sending me emails like that. I was correct. It was a 201 student. You want to be concise, but you want to be specific, okay? Greeting, usually just use the first name. You don't have to use Mr., Professor, that kind of thing, doctor, whatever. Typically, you just usually use your first name for people that you are fairly casual with. Sometimes your boss may want you to call them something else. I personally don't care if you just say Kyle or whatever. Doesn't matter to me, but just be aware of your audience and who you're talking to. I know that there are faculty in the hallway that do care. You would not want to send an email to a PhD and call them by their first name. They do not like that. I will tell you that right now. So if you have a PhD as an instructor, don't send them an email with their first name. They are doctor, believe me. They've worked very hard and paid a lot of money for that. So message, body, double space between the heading and the body, between paragraphs, and then there are a lot of organizations that will tell you, here's our template for emails. Use this template when you're sending an email. Okay? Yep. No. Okay, so the question was, on the subject line, do you need to capitalize everything? You don't. Typically, if you're going to send something that's urgent or requires attention, then you would capitalize like urgent or attention. So for emails, we don't really need to say sincerely, best wishes, regards, love ya, whatever you're going to send. Probably don't need to do that in an email. Your signature should include all the information they need to get back with you, right? So when who you guys will be sending emails to most at this point is you're going to be sending emails to recruiters, people that are trying to hire you. You want to include every piece of information so that they can contact you back very easily without having to look for you, right? Because I'm going to tell you right now, there are enough of you applying that if they have to go through and look for you, they are probably just going to go, you know what, there's other people that I don't have to go look for. Okay, so make sure you include all that information in your signature. Again, most companies that you work for will provide you a template for your signature. Okay. Reference lines. Really, these are mostly for the memos. Okay. You're going to, for a memo, it's going to be like dates and times, places, all that information that you need to know in addition to what's going into the message, okay? So purposes for emails, memos, they're going to be to request. Again, when we're requesting information, we're going to use the direct approach, okay? We may be needing to inform somebody. So for good news, we use the direct approach. For bad news, we're going to use the indirect approach, meaning we're going to buffer that bad news with a little bit of niceness beforehand. If we're needing to, well, persuade is later. But again, remember that persuade is, we're going to use that, or for non-interested parties, you're going to use that persuasive approach. We may be needing to report something, right? I know that when I worked at the auditor's office, I would have to send emails reporting the hours that I spent doing certain tasks, right? So I would report that information. Today, I had to send a reminder email that, hey guys, remember, today is the day that I needed you guys to have all of your AI information to the GAs so that we could start compiling it, okay? It was literally a single sentence that I sent them. I think I said, faculty, please have your academic integrity policy sent to Lucy by the end of the day today. That was it, okay? Nothing more. You may need to transmit certain things like attachments. You may be transmitting receipts, invoices, purchase orders, bills of lading, that kind of thing. And then also to promote goodwill. You'll see this in the audit sphere quite a bit, especially if you're working in CPA firms, because they are paying you to come in and do their audits. You want to keep goodwill with them. And this is not the kind of goodwill that you guys may or may not be thinking about right now. Have you guys talked about goodwill in 301 yet? A little bit? You guys know that it's a thing and that's about it right now? Yeah, okay. So this is not that kind of goodwill. This is like actual legit goodwill where it's like, oh, now we're buddies, okay? So emails, you want to limit the length, limit the number of topics, limit the recipients. You only want it to go to the people that it needs to go to. One thing that, I don't know, I can't remember if it's addressed here later or not, but one thing that I saw a lot of, especially when you work for a company that has 40,000 employees across 8 different states, you get the reply all email. So they would send an email out to everybody to inform them of a policy or something like that, and you inevitably got the people that would reply all and say, I don't need this. And now all of a sudden you have 40,000 people replying all to the same email. Don't do that. Make sure you're sending it to the right people. A good embarrassing story about me sending an email to the wrong people, making sure it did not go to the right recipients, is the girl that I met that would eventually tolerate me long enough to become my wife. I met her when I started working at Mercy. Her name is Cindy. I worked in a department where I sent lots of emails to the cash accounting group. One day I was listening to, well, at that point they were iPods. I was listening to, well, it was an MP3 player. It wasn't even an iPod. And a song came up that was like our song, right? And so I emailed her, our song's on Huggy Emotion or some garbage like that. I got about 30 emails immediately from these little old ladies that worked in cash posting telling me how sweet and cute I was. Because I had, instead of sending it to Cynthia's son at that point, sent it to cash posting. Very embarrassing. So be careful. Make sure you're sending emails to the right people. It's important, okay? Watching the tone of your email, this is important as well. It's hard to get tone across in the written language, right? Like, I know for a fact that my wife has texted me before, and I'm like, oh, she's mad. She's real mad. And then I talked to her and she's like, I wasn't mad. What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, it sounded like you were mad. Same thing happens all the time in email. If you work at a place that has IM, so instant messaging, so you can communicate quicker, it's even quicker than email, right? Really hard there. I've had lots of people come up to my desk because of IMs that I sent them, and they're like, dude, why are you such a jerk? I'm like, what are you talking about? You just don't get any tone from those, so you have to watch your tone. Even though you don't really convey much of a tone, you've got to consider the audience and how they may take it, okay? Very important thing here, and I will tell you guys this, I've seen less and less of it over the last couple semesters, but don't use emoticons when we're sending emails back and forth in this class. Please, please don't, okay? Typically, you don't want to do that. Like I said, we're going to run this class kind of like I'm the manager and you work for me, right? You typically are not, unless you've worked with your manager for a long time, going to be sending that person smiley faces, right? So just be careful, be cautious, keep the communication as professional as possible, okay? This is all, the last point on here is important. You have to be cautious of viruses, okay? You'll learn all about that in the accounting program, phishing attempts and all that good stuff. You just got to be careful. Don't click on anything that looks weird, typically you're going to want to forward that on to your IT department and say, hey, I got this. It's strange. It does not seem right. There are some things you can do to be sure that it's a legitimate email. If you have somebody send you a website link, if it does not say HTTPS on it, guess what that means? It means it is not a secure site. If it just says HTTP, you do not want to click it. It is not a secure site. It has to say HTTPS. Then it's maybe okay to go to. Okay. These things have gotten very, very, very efficient and very realistic looking. It is hard in some instances to determine what's a phishing attempt and what is legitimately Netflix trying to get you to authorize somebody logging into your account. Okay. Memos. Memos are like one step up in professionalism from the emails. You want them to sound professional. You want them to sound courteous. They really should only cover your main topic. Like I said, most of the memos you're going to see as you progress through your career are going to be from places like HR, updating you on new policies or updating you on a policy that you should be remembering because somebody did something silly and they had to fire somebody. Those are the ones that we got most often. You've got to use the 6 C's, but that's going to be across all of our communication, right? All of our communication, we're going to try to utilize the 6 C's of communication. Memos are quick, they're inexpensive, right? You're just sending them internally, they're cheap. They cost you whatever it costs to store them on a server for whoever keeps them as long as they want to keep them. They're convenient. And they are, like I said, my favorite part, a written record. They are a way to document these items, okay? The memo types we don't really need to worry about too much in this class. In this class, the memos that we write will be internal memos, and they will be fairly simple, okay? We have one internal memo that is due towards the end of the class, and that is, we'll talk about it next week. It's for the LinkedIn project, and you will have to complete a memo. The only somewhat difficult thing about that is it has to include an appendix in it. Okay. Business letters. Now, these are the ones that are going to give you guys the most fits, and you're going to hate these the most in this class, I would imagine, because these are the most formal type. They need to be, the language in them needs to be very formal, yet written in a way that people can understand it. Okay. What we tend to do as accountants is write in a lot of jargon. You guys especially, because you're just learning all this fun new stuff about accounting, and you like letting people know that now you know these things about accounting. So you guys tend to write in a lot of jargon, and you tend to use a lot of technical wording, and that's okay. There is a time and a place for technical writing. If you become an auditor, you will do plenty of technical writing because you will be writing work papers that are only going to be seen by other people that have master's degrees in accounting. So they understand it. But when you're writing to the guy who maybe didn't finish high school, but was really, really good at business, you probably don't want to use a bunch of jargon, right? So you want to include a letterhead. That's really, really important. So for instance, when I took over Beta Alpha Psi, I had to get the Sam's Club account changed from Dr. Keller to me. I had to bring in a letter from Dr. Keller saying that that was okay, and I had to bring it in on a letter with a letterhead from Missouri State University. So that typically just lets them know this is an official document, okay? When your letterhead is at the top, it is an official document. So typically we use a business style date line, so it's going to say the entire month, a date, and then the year. Your inside address, meaning your company's address, your name, your title, company name, address, city, all the stuff you would typically include, you just need to include yourself in it as well. Because you're the one writing it, that's who they're going to communicate with once they get it. Attention line is optional depending on who you are sending it to. Typically, if it is for a specific person, you are going to address it to a specific person. If you don't know who that person is, then you may want to use an attention line. So for giving instructions, the big thing here, like I said, you're typically going to have to number your instructions, and you want to put them in the order that people are going to do them, okay? So My 201 class, for instance, I don't provide them tons of instruction, but the weekly folders, the weekly content folders on their Blackboard, I put their assignments in the order that I feel is most logical for them to complete them in. I would not put the quiz on top, because what happens, you have students that just click the first thing they see, and now all of a sudden they're locked into a 10-question quiz where they haven't seen any of the content. And now I'm getting tons of emails going, well, I took the quiz on accident, I hadn't read the book yet or done the homework. And it's like, well, that's why I put them in that specific order. Quiz is very last, usually lecture videos, lecture notes, homework, quiz, right? So make sure you list the steps in the order that they're going to be completed. You need to write instructions with the user in mind, okay? Make sure you are writing for your user. That's the whole point in this, the communication. We're always considering the user. We're always considering how they're going to receive the information, how they're going to follow the process. So always keep your user in mind, okay? You want to test the instructions for completeness, for accuracy. Make sure that you can actually follow the instructions and complete the task. This will happen to me in this class at some point throughout the semester. I will give you something and it will not work. I think it happened with Chapter 9 homework. For whatever reason, it wasn't available to you guys. I could see it. You guys couldn't. So I had to make it available, right? So somebody didn't test the instructions to make sure that it could be seen. I don't remember if it was me or one of the GAs, but somebody didn't test the instructions. Making an announcement. Again, you want to make sure that it's tested against completeness, make sure that it makes sense. Typically, and we get lots of these here in the College of Business, they do lots of like faculty events, lots of like meet the faculty over at the PSU, lots of faculty appreciation breakfasts, award ceremonies, that kind of stuff. So we get lots and lots of event announcements. Like I said, the announcements can come through a memo. Sometimes you'll see an announcement about a new employee, things like that. Meeting notices, also type of announcement. They may say, hey, we're having an open forum meeting, this and this date, at this and this time, at this and this place, okay? Typically what you're going to see, and this is going to apply for almost every kind of communication you do when you get into business, your employer will have a procedures manual, or what we call a standard operating procedure. This is how you do this thing. You must follow our guidelines. So don't be too nervous. They're not going to expect you to come up with these things like from the ground up. Somebody has worked very hard and for a very long time to make sure that these things work appropriately and effectively and efficiently, and you will be given that information, okay? The rest of this really is just going back through the 6 C's, kind of, right? So completeness, precise, conciseness, okay? So we're not going to spend much more time on this, and it's really about time for the end of class. So these really, when you're writing requests, you just need to make sure you're being complete in your requests so that they know exactly what you're asking. What I get a lot is, hey, Mr. Gooden, could you please fill out this reference for me for a scholarship? Okay, I can do that if you tell me where to submit it, when it needs to be done by, all of that good stuff. Because if it needs to be done tomorrow, I'm probably not going to get it done. If it needs to be done a month from now, that's different. I've got time to look at it and work on it. I've got time to actually write a decent letter of reference for you, okay? So complete, precise, you want to be reasonable. You don't want to, oh my God, so my first semester here, I tried to be really, really cool with absolutely everybody that asked me to write reference requests for them. I had a student in my accounting 732 class that asked me to write a single reference request for a graduate program for her. I said, yes, sure, no problem. What ended up happening is she submitted to 6 different grad schools, and I had to write 6 different letters for that. That was not reasonable. She did not temper my expectations with that. So that girl is part of the reason why I'm very selective about who gets reference letters now. So be courteous, that's always the thing. Be prompt. I try to be prompt with you guys, usually within 24 hours is kind of my policy for emails and responses, but you will find that I'm typically quicker than that unless you email me at like 11 o'clock at night, in which case I have kids, they wake me up at 5:30 in the morning, I'm already asleep. So Outside of that, though, I'm pretty quick, so you should be as well. Be helpful, even if you can't, if you're not the one that can help them, if you can't get them the information, get them to somebody who can. Tell them, hey, I'm going to help you get there. I just can't do it myself, whatever the case is, okay? Being specific, so we do this a lot in auditing. When you receipt money, I actually had one of our faculty send an email with his academic integrity documents to our GA last night, and he said, please send me receipt confirmations for these. And I laughed. And then I texted him, I said, dude, you are such a nerd. You just asked a student for receipt confirmation. And I said, I got a pretty good chuckle out of that. But he was doing what he should have been. He was being very specific. I want to make sure you got these, right? Tell me you got these, okay? And then being complete. So, any questions in this last 30 seconds that we have together? I know, it was a lot. It's incredibly boring. But from here on out for the rest of the semester, we're going to be delving into things that you guys are not as familiar with. So next week we'll start with the LinkedIn memo. And we will also, so the calendar right now has a guest speaker on Monday. She had to move to Wednesday. So Monday we'll do LinkedIn stuff, talk about the LinkedIn memo, what that entails. Wednesday we'll have the guest speaker. It's Dr. Franklin from the Office of Student Conduct. She will be talking to you guys about academic integrity. It's very important. We like to hit you guys early with that because you guys are under a ton of pressure and there's lots of opportunity to take shortcuts. And we do not want to see that happen. So, all right, guys, I will see you next week.